Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathashala. I am Dr. Sabu Matthew George from CWDS and as an independent researcher. Today we are going to talk on the module Mapping the Child Sex Ratio, the first part, under the paper The Stories of that the States Tell. The objective of this module is to make the student aware of the issue of female feticide and by mapping child sex ratio so as to understand the spatial dimensions of the spread and intensity of the changes in sex ratio over time. We are starting with definitions. What is sex ratio? And globally in India and it is different. So in India, sex ratio is defined as number of females per 1,000 males, and child sex ratio will be the number of females per 1,000 males in the age group of 0 to 6 years. So we are looking at the census of 2001. We are using census for this entire presentation because census is the only source of data which will cover every habitation, every village, every ward in an urban area. And since census happens only every 10 years, we are looking at the most two recent census, census 2001 and 2011. So in 2001, we saw Punjab and Haryana having very low ratios. Uh, and, uh, and the surrounding areas of Himachal, Uttaranchal, Rajasthan, Gujarat, a little better off, but there again, well below 910. And if you look at eastern India or southern India, they're much better off. Looking at the situation between 2001 and 2011. This shows you both the census maps, and you see, like a place like Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir have had the sharpest drop in 2011 census, while Punjab and Haryana have improved a little bit, but you have seen very sharp drops in Uttar Pradesh, in Maharashtra. Gujarat and Rajasthan have again at the overall have remained at the same level, but you see very significant drops in many districts of Rajasthan, while some districts of southern Gujarat have improved. So we are looking at earlier we looked at the states, now we are looking at districts. So we are looking at nearly 600 districts. We had about 630 to 640 districts in 2011. So when you look at what you're seeing at the state level, it's aggregate, but at the district level, you will find that even parts of Madhya Pradesh, parts of Uttar Pradesh, you will find deep red drops, which means we are looking at ratios which are between 830 or even much less than that. So when you come down, you will see some improvement in Gujarat, very sharp drop in many districts of Rajasthan as well as in Maharashtra. Okay, now this is India with the child sex ratios in different colors, and as we have indicated before, child sex ratio indicates the extent of discrimination against girls before birth, at birth, and after birth in the initial years of the life. If there is no discrimination against the girl child, sex ratios can be as high as 980 girls per 1,000 boys. But large part of India increasingly are falling below 900 and sometimes even below 800. So we are looking at this state of Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is almost like a continent. It's the most populous state of the country, and huge in terms of, it starts from the borders of Uttarakhand, Punjab, Haryana, and goes all the way to eastern India, bordering Jharkhand, Bihar. So of more than 80 districts, what we are seeing is in 2001, it was the westernmost districts which were affected. 2011, we see the spread towards central and eastern UP. you will find like in eastern UP, urban centers like Allahabad and Varanasi drop. Now we are looking at eastern India, a state of West Bengal. Now remember, we are using different cutoffs in different regions of India because the declines have started at different times. Punjab, Haryana, we have seen declines in 80s and 90s. In Bengal, we are seeing declines more recently. So if you look at this map of West Bengal, 2001 looks really dark green, most of which, except for Calcutta, which is yellow and which remains in yellow in the 2011. So you do find a lot of dark green areas, particularly upper Bengal, Darjeeling area and adjacent areas declining. So now by standards of UP, 950 would look very good in UP, but in a state like of Bengal, 950 becomes the average. Now Maharashtra, again, if you look at 2001 itself, you've seen so much of red and dark red. The developed areas of Maharashtra are the western areas, and what you are seeing right now is even the backward areas of Maharashtra, like parts of Marathwada, have already had worse child sex ratios. And this is the paradox. That is, sex determination becomes popular not only where in the most developed areas, but also in the underdeveloped areas. So what you're seeing in 2011, that most of Maharashtra, there is a considerable decline even in most parts of eastern Maharashtra, which were much better off. So practically what you're seeing is light green and green have all disappeared. Even the coastal regions which were better off have declined. So what we are seeing is almost a change in almost all parts of all districts of Maharashtra. Now we look at this Tamil Nadu, one of the biggest states of South India. Now till 81 the ratios in Tamil Nadu were good, but in 91 there were some declines, but by 2001 right from the top in Dharmapuri down all the way down to Theni, it started declining. And 2011 we saw some improvements in Salem, in parts of Tamil Nadu, but what we are seeing is an incredible shift towards eastern parts of Tamil Nadu. So this is something which is very disturbing, because ratios which were not affected in the previous in the 80s, 90s or 2000 have dropped in 2011. And remember, traditionally southern India and eastern India were very much different from northern India, and what we are seeing today, southern India is also, and particularly Tamil Nadu, is showing very, very disturbing trends. Like for instance, in 1991, Salem in central Tamil Nadu was the worst district ever of all the 550 districts or so of the country. Now we are looking at the child sex ratios, imbalances at the sub-district level. We have seen at the India level first, then we saw at the state level, now we are going towards the sub-state level. Because the smaller the unit you're looking at, the larger the variation. And if you want to see where the district is heading, you need to look at what is happening to the sub-districts. If you want to know where the state is heading, you need to look at the sub-district, at the district level. And finally, at the country level, if you want to know where the country is heading in the coming years, you need to look at the states in terms of what the kind of heterogeneity it is showing, in terms of time, in terms of space. Now we are looking at the sub-districts, because districts are too big in many parts of India. So when we look at sub-districts, we see the changes which are happening at smaller levels, and therefore this is what is disturbing. When you look at 2001, you saw a lot of good areas green, which were much better than 950. Now practically almost all the green have disappeared. Large parts of light green in central and eastern UP have all becoming much more yellow or red. So sub-district changes will tell you what will happen in the district in the coming few years. So what you see is that earlier in 2001, there was relatively, except for the border districts, there was relatively less red in towards central or eastern. Now what that has changed very drastically. Now when you look at district like Jhansi, which is at the edge of UP, virtually projecting Jhansi, Lalitpur, etc., projecting into Madhya Pradesh, what we are seeing, so changes we are seeing everywhere. In the Bundelkhand region, which was better off, we are seeing worse off. We are seeing even in Sonbhadra, which was largely a tribal area, things have become much worse. Up in the border of Nepal, some of the eastern districts were very much better off. Now we are seeing declines there. And of course, central UP, eastern, I mean the better off areas of Allahabad, Varanasi, etc. Now we are seeing very profound changes. Now we are looking at Bengal at the sub-district. Now, as you've seen before, at the district level, Bengal looks very impressive. But now the moment we go to sub-districts, we are seeing, even in upper Bengal, North Bengal, we are seeing red, which is between 900 and 920 for Bengal. And we are seeing even in the lower parts, we are seeing changes. So this is something which is very, very disturbing. Though we have large numbers of sub-districts which are above 950, 960, we are also seeing more yellowing, which is 920 to 940, which means about 2 to 3% of, between 1 to 3% of girls being eliminated. So, and we see contiguous areas. So that suggests what we are seeing are real things and not random distribution. So now we are looking at Maharashtra at sub-district level. So first of all, what we are seeing is that large parts of eastern Maharashtra which hardly had any red, have much more red and certainly much more yellow. We are seeing even towards the western part of Maharashtra, we are seeing a large expansion. So virtually the entire Marathwada, some part of western Maharashtra and large parts of eastern Maharashtra are all becoming very, very. So virtually the whole state has dropped very sharply. One of the sharpest drops in 2011 has been because you have seen changes in most sub-districts of Maharashtra. And Maharashtra is important because it's a state between North India and South India, traditionally very politically very progressive, educationally and culturally also more liberal. And what we are seeing, that sex selection has changed tremendously in these areas of more liberal parts of our country. So what we are looking at is now Tamil Nadu at the sub-district level. So what we are seeing practically red in most parts of, whether it's upper part of Tamil Nadu or way down, we are seeing even yellow coming in. We have seen a huge amount of less than 920, that is more than 3% of the girls eliminated in around Kadalur and around. So that is something which is very disturbing. Because traditionally Tamil Nadu ratios were one of the better in South India. But now what we are seeing is that at the sub-district level, we are practically seeing so little green in 2011. Now I'm going to talk without maps. You have already seen the regional heterogeneity. You have learned that Northern India was relatively worse off, while southern India and eastern India had good levels traditionally. So What we are now looking at is the impact of the misuse of modern technologies on these traditional differences. So, scholars for decades had explained the differences between North, South, and East in terms of cultural and demographic factors. But today, one has to look at sex selection, when it started, and how it has spread and intensified over time to understand the new patterns of changes. So, this again, what we are looking at is that regional differences today are becoming less marked. That is, the change, what we are seeing in over the last 20 years in between the 90s and 2001 and 2001 to 2011 is that the is not only the worst of areas are becoming much worse, but we are also seeing that there is greater discrimination at birth in southern India and eastern India, which traditionally had better ratios. So what we have to understand therefore is that absolute levels of sex ratios would definitely be different, like eastern India, Bengal would look very impressive. Southern India, some parts of even Tamil Nadu or parts of Andhra or Karnataka and large parts of Kerala would have fairly good ratios. But what we have to recognize, we are seeing declines everywhere in the country. Now, what is the extent of decline will differ from area to area. We have seen in Punjab and Haryana, because the ratios had dropped very sharply in 2001, we have seen some improvements in Punjab and Haryana, while we are finding very steep declines in Jammu and Kashmir. When you go to West Bengal, we are seeing at the district level some changes, but at the sub-district level, we are even seeing much sharper declines. So Western UP, we have to look at levels between 820 to 870 in the more severely affected areas, while in Eastern UP, the better off areas are also dropping. One of the ways to look at the region, how the regional differences are changing is to look at the worst 10. The worst 10 in 2001 was in the traditional area of Northwest India, fierce patriarchy. Most of the 10 districts were in that region. Now, 2011 will show you an entirely regional pattern of the 10 worst districts. So we see areas like Pithoragarh, which is up on the border of in Uttarakhand, near the border of Nepal and Tibet. We are seeing Jammu and Samba, in Jammu's region of Jammu and Kashmir. We are seeing in the Marathwada region, one of the most backward areas of Maharashtra, and one of the most backward districts of Marathwada, Beed, has emerged to be among the worst 10. So this change among the worst 10 districts itself is one way to look, which reveals the dramatic changes which is happening in the regional demography of our country as far as child sex ratios at birth in the country are concerned. Now we come to some of the best states. Kerala, for instance, which has had for 100 years among the best child sex ratios of the country. We are seeing now declines at the sub-district level. Now remember, what we have seen from 90s is that once this decline starts in one area within a district, that's one sub-district drops, then it spreads much faster. So when you see a sub-district level at 930, in a district which is 950, now a district of 950 in Kerala may not look that impressive, but in a district of 950 in UP or Punjab or Haryana would look extremely impressive. So when you look at Kerala, remember that a ratio of 930 at the sub-district level is somewhere like looking at 800s or 850s in Punjab or Haryana. So therefore, this regional declines at the sub-district levels cannot be ignored. Now, all this while we are looking at declining in child sex ratios. Remember, in the last 40 years, we have seen remarkable improvements in malnutrition, particularly girl-child malnutrition. We are seeing improvements in child mortality, infant mortality, maternal mortality rates have dropped. We are seeing very significant improvements in literacy of women around the country. From the late 80s, we have seen women have started living longer than men. For instance, in Kerala, women are living 5 years longer than men. So therefore, what is disturbing about sex selection is that this phenomena, which reflects extreme form of discrimination against women, is becoming worse, while almost all the other indicators which are looking at women's status are improving. So again, let me emphasize, so by most indicators of women's development, women are doing much better. Now, if you do not deal with this ongoing genocide of sex selection, where tens of millions of girls were not allowed to be born, the intergenerational consequences will last for a very long time. And when you look at 15 million missing girls over the last 20 or 25 years, the consequences will be frightening for the next several generations. So we are trying to emphasize that effective actions can still be taken and we can see turnaround, like we have seen improvements in Punjab and Haryana. We have seen improvements in Maharashtra. If rest of the country can learn from these turnarounds, then not every district, every region will have to reach 800 levels or low 900s before it starts improving. Now, it's important to remember as of today that a large number of children who are going to be counted in 2021 have already been born. So therefore, it's important to recognize that though we may not be able to make much changes in the 2021 census, but if we don't start taking effective actions so that more girls are going to be born, then any subsequent turnaround in the post-2021 time also becomes very unlikely. So what we are seeing is, in 91, there were a large number of districts which didn't seem to have much changes, but 2001, more districts got affected, and 2011 even more. So this, where Satish Agnihotri used to use the term epicenter to look at the worst foci, from where it spreads from one district to the entire region. Scholars like Guillemotto used cold spots and hot spots to look at the extremes. Cold being really good ratios, hot meaning very at the worst areas. And the presumption was that the cold will also spread just like the hot spots are spreading. But quantitative analysis of the 91, 2001, 2011 by scholars have shown that hotspots are indeed spreading, like what you have been seeing in so many of these maps. And not only cold spots are disappearing, as scholar Rajani has concluded, but cold spots doesn't seem to have a positive impact on the neighboring areas. Thus, increasing masculinization of child sex ratios of all regions of the country, most districts of the country, is what we are seeing. Stop. See, so far I have shown you fixed cutoff maps. Now I would like to emphasize that that whatever cutoffs you take, whichever region you take, you will find the same conclusions I have been talking about. I give you a few exercises you where you can actually choose variable cutoffs. Fortunately, all this you can do on the website censusgis.org. So you can pick and choose a district of yours of what you're interested, or a state of what you're interested, and look at the sub-state or sub-district areas of your area of choice. Now, you can actually do multiple cutoffs, but I'm trying to simplify it for your this thing, and I'm starting with the first exercise. So I'm doing the first exercise comparing the wards of 2001 and 2011 of Calcutta. So I start with West Bengal state, then I choose Calcutta in the search box. So I choose for the district of Calcutta. Then I open both the boxes of 2001 and 2011 so that I can see both the maps together. And once I see those two maps, I go to the query and choose the indicator child sex ratio. Then I put in the data ranges. Here I'm looking at less than 900, and I can also repeat it with less than 850. So you can see what the outcome of in map. Similarly, the second exercise is on urban UP. I'm looking at the changes between 2001 and 2011. Again, you can go to choose UP state at the censusgis.org website and open 2001 and 2011 maps simultaneously. In the query box, you choose a category as child sex ratio and indicate as urban child sex ratio, and choose the data range less than 920, and one sees the map which I'm seeing it. So in this exercise, we are looking at Uttarakhand at sub-district level between 2001 and 2011. So choose Uttarakhand state in the censusgis.org website. Then simultaneously open 2001 and 2011 maps and choose sub-district and indicate a child sex ratio, then the data range less than 920. Finally, the fourth exercise is looking at Mahbub Nagar. This is a district of Andhra Pradesh, which is presently undivided Andhra is Telangana and Andhra. And so when you choose Mahbub Nagar, you choose the simultaneous display of 2001 and 2011 census map. Then choose the query box, category as child sex ratio, and data range of less than 925. We have mapped child sex ratios at different levels today, at all India level, at state level, at district level, and even at the sub-district level. And we have looked at the trends over 2001 and 2011 census. So let us keep in mind that there has been a long history of discrimination against women in our subcontinent, maybe 1,000 years or older. And ever since the census of India has been done, since the 1870s, we have known that there are less women in the subcontinent, and sadly there are less girls. But fortunately, over the last 100 years, 120 years, we have seen sex ratios of women, sex ratios of the population, that is, of the entire population, are improving because women are living longer, women are dying less of childbirth. But tragically, in the 0 to 6 years, we are seeing, particularly before birth, over the last 40 years, we are seeing very sharp declines in the sex ratio of children under the age of 7 years. Largely because more and more girls are eliminated before birth, that is, girls are not allowed to be born. Now, fortunately, after 2001, because of the increased attention of the governments and increased concern of the people in northwest India, particularly in Punjab and Haryana, sex ratios have started improving. But if every part of the country and every district has to follow the Punjab Haryana trend, which improvement started only after the ratios dropped below 800 or nearly low 800s, then in that case, if that is a pattern which is going to happen for the rest of the several hundred districts in the country, India would lose at least 50 million girls over the coming few decades. And it is in this context we are talking about raising public awareness against the declining child sex ratios and against the illegal practice of sex selection by the unethical medical practitioners. So when you look at the worst districts, for instance, that again shows you the drastic changes which we are seeing in the distribution of low child sex ratios in the country. Earlier in 2001, the worst 10 districts were in northwest India, almost all of them in Punjab, Haryana. Now what we are seeing, as technology of sex selection has increased all around the country, wherever the intensification has become very bad, like Uttarakhand, that is Pithoragarh, which is in Uttarakhand in the border of Nepal and China. Pithoragarh has one of the worst 10 districts, worst 10 lowest child sex ratios of the country. Similarly, we are finding a Bid, which is an extremely backward area of Marathwada, which is a backward part of Maharashtra, becoming in the lowest 10 districts of the country. Not only are we seeing similarly we are seeing worst districts appearing in Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Samba were bad in 2001 and 2011 they became among the worst 10. Similarly, among the better performing states, like for instance Kerala, over the last 100 years had very good ratios, among the best in the country. Now at the sub-district level, we are seeing declines. Like in Trichur, we are seeing declines in Chavakad. We are seeing 930 levels at overall and even below that at these urban levels. So when we look at sex ratio patterns, scholar Satish Agnihotri has used the word epicenters. That is where, looking at the earthquake analogy, looking at where the worst areas are happening. Guillemotto, a global scholar on child sex ratios, has talked about hot spots and cold spots. Hot is where the worst areas and cold is where the best areas. The idea being that the hypothesis being that hot will influence the neighboring areas and the cold will influence neighboring areas. However, the recent analysis of 3 censuses, 91, 2001 and 2011 have shown that the cold areas are virtually disappearing. The cold areas don't seem to have an impact on their adjacent areas while the hot areas are increasing, and it has a deleterious effect on the neighboring areas. So both in terms of spread as well as intensification of discrimination against the girl child. We are really seeing very frightening consequences in 2011, and unless we take the law, we are unlikely to see improvements in the coming decade. It is possible, given the trends we have seen so far. 2021 we may not see any significant improvement in child sex ratios. Certainly we are seeing improvements in Maharashtra, we are seeing improvements as of now in Haryana, and we are seeing improvements in most parts of Rajasthan. Therefore, in 2021, we can see some of these states improve, like what we have seen Punjab, Haryana improve in 2001 and in 2011. But when we are looking at UP and Bihar, because these two states account for 1 in 3 girls born in the country, we have seen very little improvement, in fact stagnation over many years in sex ratios at birth. And therefore, unless UP and Bihar improves, we are unlikely to see very significant changes in sex ratios at birth and child sex ratios in the coming census.